Okay, welcome all. And we're just going to go through some stuff and where things are now with legislation. And then we're also going to go through a policy that Medicaid has out for comment so that if anyone wants to comment on it, just the process of how you go about doing that. And we are going to share some information from them and then also the comments that we're thinking about offering as an organization. But is there anything in particular anyone wanted to talk about today or that you're wondering about or particularly concerned about? Okay. All right. Well, those of y'all who were here last time, we keep this pretty, try to keep it pretty casual and open, but also to try to make it as real and practical as possible. And I am going to share my screen and I will be honest with you. I was like on some of this stuff, still working on it right up until around 11, including getting some help from Medicaid. So there's probably 5,000 screens open and it may take us a minute to get to where we want to go, but I think we'll get to good places. So the first thing we're going to do, last time we were on here, we talked about, does anybody ever feel like trying to follow legislation or learn about it seems sort of scary and intimidating and like you have to know everything in the universe to be able to do it? Anybody ever have those feelings? All right. Well, just want to reassure everyone that you don't have to, and that we're really lucky in our state because the information, and here we go, that's on the Mississippi State Legislature website is really pretty helpful. And you can just go into your search bar and say Mississippi State Legislature, and it'll come up and let's see, the homepage will look like this. And what we're going to talk about today is some stuff that's under general information. So if you've got questions, that's a good place to go. If you're looking for a piece of legislation, you go to legislation. If you're looking for a legislator. Okay, but let's just look at this and look at where we are in the process. So it can be confusing because a whole bunch of things have to happen before a bill that gets introduced becomes a law. And there's a lot of different steps that happen. And we're going to go through those real quick and look at where we are in that process. But I wanted to ask y'all, just thinking about it, what do you think about the idea that there's a lot of steps and it can be kind of hard for a bill to become a law? What do y'all think? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or who knows what kind of thing? Any thoughts about that?
I personally think it's a bad thing. There's a lot of steps in the process. I have followed Mississippi legislation in regards to, other like criminal justice reform issues and things like that. And there seems to be so many different places where, things can fall through the cracks with the process itself and how confusing it can be.
So that's a really frustrating part of the process for sure. And so, yeah, and so many, if you're not watching every minute, something happen that changes everything. Okay. Any other thoughts? Like a disadvantage. Any other thoughts about what could be a disadvantage or things that could there possibly be any advantages? One thing to think about is the same things that Sarah was talking about that make it so frustrating with something that seems like a good thing to happen can be helpful if it's something that may not be a good idea for it to happen. Now, the thing about legislation is we could all be looking at it, and I think there's about 12 of us on here, and 5 of us could think, oh, this is a really good idea. 5 of us could think, oh, this is a really bad idea. And then 2 of us could think, I don't care about that particular piece of legislation. I don't see how it applies to anything that, is relevant to my life. But the fact that it takes a long time and there's different things that happen along the way does open it up for some hope for it to be slow, and then for many different times to intervene and either stop it or change it. So that can be a good thing or a bad thing, but it is a thing regardless. Okay, so let's look. And so we're going to look, just remind you how a bill becomes the law. So when you hear people talking about, oh, there's this deadline and that deadline, that can be really confusing. And this is a helpful chart to go back and look at. Now I'm just going to make sure my screen sharing is working. And I need someone to just tell me because I can't see everyone if you're nodding. Okay, see it? Okay. So what happens, gets introduced in either the House or the Senate. And we're talking about, sometimes this is confusing too. We're talking about in the state Senate or the state House. There's also legislation at the federal level, the United States level, but we're talking about what happens in Mississippi. So that's our state legislation. So it gets referred to a committee. So if it gets introduced by a senator, it gets referred to a Senate committee. It's referred by a representative in the House, it gets referred to a House committee. Then the committee has hearings about it. We hope they talk about it. Sometimes they just bring things up. And then they decide whether or not it's going to be discussed in committee. The chairman decides if it's going to be discussed in committee and then the committee votes on it. If they vote yes, it comes out of committee. Then it gets placed on the calendar for everybody in that chamber to vote on. And it can be debated and then voted on. A lot of times things don't really get debated, but that's what happens. And then if it makes it through all those times and gets voted on in the House, in the side it started on, and it gets voted, enough people vote yes on it, the majority votes yes on it, then it goes to the other side and the same thing happens. So this is where we are now. We've been through all of this on the top. Then it went, all the Senate bills that were still alive, and that's what we call it, as long as it keeps getting voted out of each thing. If it doesn't get voted, like if it doesn't get voted out of committee, or if it goes to the floor of the Senate and it's a Senate bill and more people vote no than yes, it dies. So it doesn't keep moving on. So all those bills that survived in the House, on the side they got introduced on, went to the other side. They got referred to committees. On the other side, the committees discussed them and then they voted. So this is where we are now. All of those bills have gone through their own side and then their the committees on the other side and have been voted on. So that means that there's many fewer bills than when we started over here. There were literally like 2,000 over here, and we're down to a lot less. I didn't look at the total number of bills, but Families as Allies has been following bills that are related to different areas, things that are important to the families that are part of our organization. So I'm going to pull that up. But I will tell you this, that list has gone from, it started off when we were starting at the top row as 11 pages long. And then as it went through those bills went through committees in the House, on the side they were introduced in, it got to 3 pages and now it's 2 pages. So I'm going to show you that list. But first, does anybody have any questions about this chart? The next thing that happens is those bills that made it through committee on the opposite side are going to be placed on the calendar for the whole body to vote on them over here. And then the bill will either pass or fail, or there may be, and we're going to see some bills that this is probably going to happen to today. The two sides may not agree. There may be two different versions of a bill, and then they're going to end up going to what we call conference. But that's kind of where we are in the process. And then another handout that's really, or another thing to look at that's really handy, because you might be thinking, well, how do you know when all that stuff happens? Is this, and we looked at this last time, legislative deadlines. This can be really helpful. And it tells you on what day of the session different things happen, and then what that day is. So you don't have to figure out, well, what's the 42nd day? I mean, we're probably not going to know that. But this is, and there's different deadlines listed on here. So you can see that yesterday was a deadline. So that was deadline for committees to report general bills and constitutional amendments. So those are basically things that don't have to do with the budget, originating in the other house. So the House committees had to vote on Senate bills that were in their committee, and the Senate committees had to vote on House bills that were in their committees by yesterday, or those bills died. So that's why there's fewer bills today than there would have been this time yesterday. Any questions about any of that? Okay, so now we're going to look at, wait, I'm actually going to go back to this. We're going to go back to this. Now, if you want to look up a bill and see what happened to it, there's different ways you can do that. Find a bill that I know is still alive. Okay, this is a bill that a lot of people, especially families with children with disabilities, have been interested in this session. Is House Bill 20. And that's called Cole's Law. And it's about that people with disabilities can't be discriminated against when it comes to organ transplants, because sometimes what happens is that they're automatically assumed to not be as good of a candidate for one as people without disabilities, and that's really a form of discrimination. So that has been a big push this session. So let's see, we're going to see what happened with Cole's Law. So I've typed in, and these are the prefixes. It's a House bill, and I know it's number 20. I'm going to retrieve the measure. So we can see what happened with House Bill 20. This is an interesting thing. You can see all the different steps that have happened. You can see where it was referred in, it came out in the House, where it went to a committee on that side. Then you can see where they voted on it. You can see where they sent it to the Senate. Then it went to a committee on that side. They voted on it. And then because this was a really important bill to a lot of people, they voted on the, it was on the Senate floor to send it immediately to the governor for signing, because that's the final thing that happens. And it's come back from, or it's going to come back from the governor, it looks like, by tomorrow. And then you can see other things on here, like the committees that it was referred to, who originally authored it, anybody else who worked on it. Now, this bill wasn't amended as it went through. I don't think, let me see. No. And if it was, there would be, that information would be down here. But you can find that out. And then you can look at what it looked like as it went through. And in this case, I don't think it changed at all. So now, okay, any questions or thoughts? Are we on the right track for what's helpful? Okay. Now we're going to look at, and again, I might have 5,000 things open, so it might take me a minute. Okay, here it is. This is the list of bills that we've been following, and we don't typically aren't. When we take stances on a bill as an organization, is because it's directly related to one of our core values or our beliefs. but a number of these are more just about they're related to issues that families in our organization would be interested in, and we want to make sure they have all of the information they need to decide what they think. So these are the bills that, as of this morning, that we've been following are still alive. And we will put this out. This will be what we've been doing. And, and if anybody has any ideas, like if anything we've been doing to try to share isn't the most helpful way to go about doing it, please feel free to give suggestions. But what we've been doing is putting this in our newsletter, not every week, because sometimes there isn't that much that's happened in the past week, but every week where there's been significant things that have happened, then we will this will be in our newsletter with some highlights pointed out. So you can see the way we've got this is, first of all, the date, so you know how current it is. And then we've got it divided into different areas. And I'll show you those first. The mental health bills that appear to be that are related to mental health. Now, there may be other bills about mental health that are on there that we did not either didn't notice or weren't directly related to the issues that were most relevant to families who are part of our organization. Let's just say it was something, and I don't even think there's a bill like this, but let's just say there was a mental health bill that was about geriatric psychiatry. That would be an important thing to think about, that, but that wouldn't be particularly relevant to the families of our organization. And we did any time that one thing that happens, and this is on the Senate side, is people who are going to be appointed to boards, that has to go through a Senate confirmation hearing, and they are usually, those are usually appointments by either the governor or the lieutenant governor. So those are on here too. And SN stands for Senate nomination. Now, these were referred to committees at the beginning of, I started to say semester. I've spent too many of my years of my life in school at the beginning of the session. And those are on a different timeline, but I haven't been able to get the information about like by when those have to be done. I don't know if they have the whole session to get those done. Does anyone on here know? Do you know, Mandy? She may not be where she can talk. But that's
me.
Yeah. Do you know? I lost my thing. Do you know on Senate nominations to state boards, because all of these that are on here, because we've got them for education, mental health, and I think health, they were referred at most of them at the beginning of January, and there's no indication that they've moved, that anything's happened on them yet. Do you know how long they have to do those? Because they must be on a different deadline.
I don't know. I think you're probably right, though. I think they probably take them up if they won't.
I'm sorry, what's the last thing you said?
I think they maybe they can just take them up when they won't.
Maybe.
Because it's just a confirmation, right?
Yes. Do you happen to know, Linda, like for the ones that are on the board of mental health? Because I honestly don't know. She may not, and I can't see y'all. She may not be where she could talk. But anyway, so those there hasn't been any movement on yet. But you can see, like under mental health, here's some bills that relate to mental health, and we're going to go back and look at some of these. And then the board appointments, education. Right now, other than the appointments to the board. And again, we're not taking a stance on those, but we feel like it's important for you to know who's being appointed to the boards that have to do with the systems that serve our children. So you have that information, but there's only one piece of legislation, House Bill 881, that we've been following that's still alive in education, a couple in child welfare. I think those are, and one of those, okay, it's about their funding. And then juvenile justice, everything we were following has now died. This is another one under special healthcare needs that a lot of people have been following about insurance covering hearing aids. And you'll see that that bill got amended, and it got amended. Originally, it was about requiring insurance companies to cover hearing aids for children birth to 21, which would make a difference, a significant difference to a group of families in the state who whose children need hearing aids. It got changed to require the state health plan to allow hearing aids to be covered, but not to require it in the state health plan. But then it also extended the age. It's not limited to children anymore. So that's where one example of a bill changing that some people might think those were good changes and some people may not, because it limited things more for children, didn't require the coverage for children, but extended the coverage, possible coverage to more people. And again, here are some board appointees. And here's that bill we just looked at under disability rights, and then transparency and access to information. Now you'll see two terms here at the bottom. And one of those is about going to conference, and the other is what's called a strike all amendment. So the ones that have 2 stars after them are probably going to conference, and the ones with 3 asterisks are strike all amendments. And we'll look at what that means. Okay, so you remember on that chart, we saw that when there's disagreement, like when both sides have said, yes, we're passing this, or we're likely to pass this, but the Senate looks at the bill one way, or thinks the bill should be one way, and the House should be another way, thinks it should be another way, those end up going to conference. And what happens in conference is that three people from each side are appointed to be on the conference committee and work together to come up with a version of the bill that both sides can agree on. All right, so, and I thought I may have missed some of these. Okay. So let's look. Here's one for both. Okay, and this happened with appropriations for both mental health and child protection services. Both of those agencies, there are bills that appropriate. So an appropriation is just a big word really for giving money, federal funds to those 2 agencies, and other agencies got them too. But what I'm getting ready to say, I think, is it may be true of other agencies, but it's definitely true of these 2, child protection services and mental health. They both got money appropriated to them in bills. Now they haven't gotten it yet because the bill has to be voted on, go through that final process of becoming a law from the American Rescue Plan Act. And that's what, that's one pot of money, the additional funds that came out as a result of COVID. That's one pot of money to be able to provide additional services as a result of needs that were created during COVID. So this is, let's go look. And what we can see, and child welfare is going to do the same thing, is, all right, it says title sufficient, do pass as amended. And when we see that as amended, that means something happened to it. It got changed. So let's see what happened to this bill and what it looks like now. I think I have to reshare. Okay, so this is the appropriations bill for the Department of Mental Health with that ARPA money. And you can see that right here. It's described appropriation, mental health Department of ARPA funds. And here's that same list of everything that happened starting with where it was originally referred, and then what happened. And then we come down here and we see title sufficient due pass. So that means they're voting on it based on the title, but they amended it. They changed it somehow. So we want to know, how did they change it? Now, this is a little bit different because normally to see what all happened, you look at the top. If you see an amendment, you come to the middle of the page, and that's where the amendments are going to be. Now, let's look at this one. So this was a whole long bill. I think originally it was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 pages. In fact, let's look at how it looked originally. Are y'all seeing the bill, or are you still seeing the other page?
We're seeing the bill.
Okay, so this is how it originally looked. I may be wrong as far as how long it is. Okay, I was way off. It looks like it's what, 2 pages? But it's a fair, you know, got a fair bit of language in there. That's what it looked like originally. Okay, oops, I'm sorry. But we know it got amended. So let's look at how it looks now. Okay, y'all see that? It looks kind of different, doesn't it? There's not much there. So is everybody seeing this now? Committee amendment number 1 proposed to, is that what y'all are seeing? Just making sure. Okay, so Senate Bill 2865, and that the committee, and in this case, it would be the House. How did they amend it? And they deleted section 8 in its entirety, and okay, inserted, so it's just that last section. This act shall take effect from and after July 1. So it's going to take effect July 1, but it stands repealed. So they're going to repeal it, which means take it back on June 30th. So what do y'all think of that? June 30th, 2022. Does that make any sense?
No, it does not make make any sense. How can they, if it's going to it takes effect after they repeal it?
Yeah.
How is that?
Okay. It's very confusing, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts? All right. Interesting to say the least. Yeah, I would say there's a lot of things that happen at the legislature that are interesting to say the least. Okay. Where did it go? All right. When this happens, oftentimes what's going on is that this is a bill. Now, think about this. I think there's a lot of money in this bill, and in this one, and the same exact thing is happening for the appropriations bill for child protection services. And I think mental health is around 104 million, I think. And the one for child welfare, child protection services is like, I can't remember, but it's like millions too, like maybe somewhere between 50 and 80 million. Okay, let's just say that this committee is thinking, you know, we think there's some issues with this bill. We don't agree with how the other side did it. We think it needs to be changed, but and probably they're talking to the other side, and maybe the other side saying, well, if you change it that way, we're really not going to agree. Now, they probably don't want to, you know how we talked about a bill can die? Like a committee can kill a bill by just not voting on it. But with a bill like this, can y'all see any problem or downside if the House committee said, well, we don't really agree with the Senate, and we're not sure this bill is going to work, and we can't work out a deal with them, maybe we should just kill it? and just not vote on it and let it die. Do you see with a bill like this, any problem that might happen with that? Any thoughts? I'm going to stop sharing and look at everybody. Any thoughts?
It is appropriations, correct?
Mhm.
Would that prevent money from going anywhere if?
Exactly. So if this bill died, that's it. Now, they will say with legislation, nothing's dead until like the final gavel falls during the session, because sometimes there's ways to get things reintroduced. But if they let this bill die, that means all that money that could go for mental health services, or the same thing with child protection, it's not going to get appropriated. That is probably not a very responsible thing to do for the state. And even if for some reason they could justify, like, we think that's the best thing for the state, there's probably going to be a lot of people that would be really upset about something that monumental and just letting it die. So when you see that kind of thing we were just looking at, this type of kind of weird amendment, what they're doing is they're basically stopping the bill from moving forward as it is currently written. So there must be something on the House side, or the House and Senate have talked about something where they're like, for whatever reason, we don't agree on this bill. So they're stopping it with this weird language of saying it's going to take effect on July 1st, but be repealed on June 30th. That's obvious. It keeps it alive, but that's obviously something that needs to be worked out. So what they are almost always doing, and I say almost always because there could always be some situation where they do something weird like this and it's for another reason. But what they're basically almost always doing here is saying, we know there's disagreement between the Senate and the House on this bill, but we don't want to kill it for whatever reason. And, you can see in a situation like this, you don't want to keep the state from having access to those funds. So this language almost always signals this is going to go to conference, which is that thing we talked about that's at the end of the chart where there's 3 people appointed from each side, 3 senators and 3 House of Representatives, and they will come together and work it out. So does that make sense? Okay. So on our list, whoops, I almost clicked the wrong thing and left the meeting. That would have made it hard to share this.
I have a quick question about the whole repealer thing, because I'm kind of looking at what's open. Some of these say remove repealer on, or where was it? Like extend repealer. What does that mean?
Oh, okay. What do you have the bill number on where it says extend repealer?
Let me find it again. Scroll past it. I'm sorry, I did.
Oh, that's okay. You want to keep looking and just jump
Sure.
in? Okay. So let me think what I was going to say. Oh, so on here, when you see this list, okay, now I can't find it. I wonder if I pulled up the right thing. Okay, I didn't pull up the right thing. Excuse me. I was pulling up last time's. Okay. All right. So on here, when you see something, do we say with 2 stars? And I should put likely. I'm going to put that because we don't know for sure it's going to conference until they vote. And even then we don't know for sure. So, but all of these, when you look at it, that have 2 stars, they're probably going to conference. Now, one thing that means, let's just say that there's something about that bill that you're following and you think it's really important, but you think it still needs to be changed. If it's going to conference, that's even more opportunities to try to get it changed. Now, as we were talking about at the beginning, the fact that it takes so long and there's so many steps along the way also means that things can happen to a bill that you don't support. But if there are bills on here that you're following and you think it's important, that something happened with them that hasn't happened yet, then that means there's more opportunities to do something about those when it's going to conference. Okay, now let's look at this other thing that happens sometimes. Okay, so 470, say extend repealer. Let's look at that. And I don't know if I'm going to know what it's talking about or not. But
Right, yeah.
oh, whoops, I'm sorry, I'm doing the wrong thing. Okay, so House Bill 470 is one of them.
Yes.
So you're talking about in the bill, it says extend the repealer?
Well, I'm looking at report of all measures not dead.
Okay.
And it just,
Oh, okay. And the 470?
yeah.
Okay. So in the title, it says sales tax and extend the repealer on exemption of certain sales to Toughest Kids Foundation for Camp Comisa. I may be saying that wrong in Pike County. Okay, let's look at that. So I believe what that means. Okay, this is typically with a bill, what you can tell is the stuff that is not underlined is the part that's already in state code, is already in the code, so nothing needs to change. But what's underlined is what's changing. Now, we've been talking about these repealers that are being used in a funny way, but the way repealers are normally used is to say, like some laws that are passed, in fact, a fair number of them, they have a repealer on them for several years out. Like this is going to be, unless something happens, will be repealed, say in 2024, because we don't know if we want this law to go on forever. So when it says it's extending the repealer and it has in here 2025, my guess is this was originally going to be repealed, say in 2024 or in 2023. And they're saying we're going to extend it, and because this is, a good law or appears to be a good law, and it's not going to be repealed until a later date than what the original law said. So that's typically what's meant by extending the repealer. Does that help?
It does.
Okay. All right.
Like I said, I was just kind of scrolling through them and I saw a lot of that, and it, when you were talking about the repealer, it just kind of made what exactly does that mean?
Right, because a lot of laws, and I don't know, because I don't know enough about legislation to know this, but it is certainly common when a law is passed for it to have some sort of repealer, like this will be repealed in, I don't know, 7 years or whatever, because maybe it's something like time limited, that it should whatever be done by then, or maybe like those ARPA funds, they may have a repealer on them because I think they have to be spent within a certain amount of time. So it makes sense. They might have a repealer of 2 years, but let's just say, and if the federal government comes back and says, oh, you can actually have 4 years, then next session, there might be legislation to extend that repealer. So repealers serve an important purpose. It's just when there's a lack of agreement, they use this really weird strategy with the repealers to indicate they're probably going to go to conference. Then I want to show you something else that happens. Let's see. Let's look at our list again. Okay, so we talked about the repealers. All right, there's also what we call a strike all amendment. And on here, and I don't know that I have gone through all of these yet, but on our list, when it comes out, the ones that have 3 asterisks are strike all amendments. And I'll show you what that means. Let's find a good one. Well, let's just look at Senate Bill 2341 to see what it looks like. Hang on just a second. Okay, let's go back. We're going to go to Senate Bill 2341 because it has a strike all amendment. So we see that in the House, this is title sufficient do pass as amended. Now, amended might just be kind of like that one change we saw where they just changed a date, or it might be a bigger thing. And let's look at what this one looks like. So this is what they said on Senate Bill 2341. Amend by striking all after the enacting clause. So that's the first part of the bill that says this bill is about. They're saying strike it all. So that means take it all out and insert this instead. Now you're still going to see that some is still the same and it's just the underlined things. But sometimes, okay, we come down here. They've changed a fair bit. They've added in quite a bit. And then they've changed the title. So with strike all amendments, really with any amendment, you want to go back and look at what it says, because sometimes just changing one sentence can change the whole nature of a bill. But sometimes when there's a strike all amendment, and I did not look at any of these close enough to know if this is true of any of these. Sometimes when there's a strike all amendment, it completely changes the meaning of the bill. So if there's some bill you're following or that's important to you and it gets amended, you definitely want to go back and look at what the amendment says. And again, to do that, you don't look at the top, you go down here and look at the amendments. Okay. So that's kind of an update on legislation. And I was also going to show you guys a policy from Medicaid that's open for comment, but I want to stop here. Any thoughts or questions about any of this or any other stuff with legislation you want to talk about? And is this on track for what helps? You want me to have you explain everything back, Karina? I'm not going to do that to you. Okay. All right.
You know, I be processing everything.
I know you are always processing, and you're one of the sweetest processors I've ever known, Karina. Okay. All right. You guys up for looking at a policy real quick? Okay. Now, this really is hot off the press. Oh, let's see. Well, anything, that's a good question. You're wondering if we present the same type of workshop with parents and families and how they take it all in. I would say, anything we do is always open to everyone, including parents and families. And I think we have parents and families on here now. So we pretty much present everything we do the same way, whenever we present it. And I would say people find this pretty easy to understand. I don't know. What do y'all think? Or maybe there's ways it could be more understandable. I don't know. But any feedback on that? Are you saying something, Karina, because you're muted?
Oh, I was agreeing with Ms. Hempfield that, sometimes the language that's used can be difficult to understand.
It is. It is. So probably it might have a glossary that explains it. And I would say one thing that I think may be more likely with families is that there will be a particular piece of legislation that they're interested in that they will grow to know an awful lot about. And that's one thing to think about. Sometimes people feel like legislators, they know it's so hard to approach them. And first of all, we vote for them. So they're representing us. So you have every right to contact your legislator. And keep in mind, they have to know about a whole bunch of bills. So if you're really knowledgeable about one and really following it, or even if you don't feel like you're that knowledgeable, but you're following it and you know what it says and what's happened to it, and you can explain what you think is important, you may have more information about that bill that can be really helpful to them than they themselves have. Okay. Now let me see if I can find this from Medicaid. Oh, I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do this. Bye, Lois. I'm so glad you were here. Okay. All right, the Division of Medicaid has, and this is the draft of the blog that we're working on, but it's got all the information in it. The Division of Medicaid has their policy on psychiatric residential treatment facilities, which are places like Canopy, youth villages, they're all listed in here. The crossings, you guys can see all these right here, Mill Creek and youth villages, and then a couple places out of state. Their policies on treatment planning for those facilities are open for comment. So that means that they've made some changes, and the changes they've made are to make these policies consistent with what the Department of Health, who certifies or either licenses those facilities, requires, to bring those two things in alliance. But anytime a policy is open for comment, that means anyone can comment about anything in it or about the general issue. So especially if you're a parent whose child has been in a psychiatric residential treatment facility, we encourage you to think about commenting, because you as a parent, you know some things that nobody else knows. You know what did and didn't work for your child. And if they were in a psychiatric residential treatment facility, which are often abbreviated PRTFs, you could share things that might be really helpful for other children and families that end up in that same situation. So now we're going to look at the policy. I have so many things open. Let's see. Hang on just a second. Okay, there it is. Hang on. I'm going to do a new share. Okay, so this is the policy. And we'll have the link to this. And there's probably also a way to find it through the Division of Medicaid's website, but I have not gone through that to try to find it. So I'm just going to point out a few things. First of all, and this really confused me, and I actually feel very relieved because it had also confused some of the people at the Division of Medicaid, how this was set up. If you look at this policy, the first 3 pages are the new policy with all the changes without stuff in it, without any like markups in it. I thought this was the old policy, but it's not. It's the new policy. And then the second 3 pages show you what the policy used to be and how they changed it. So what's underlined is what they added, what's struck out is what they took out. And that, I was trying to figure out what it said based on these last 3 pages. It's much easier to look at the first 3 pages. So that's one thing. And I'll just show you real quick. And I'll show you briefly. We just started looking at this, probably what we'll comment as an organization, but that doesn't mean those are the things you would want to comment about or that you'd even agree with ours. Bye. Oh, I already said bye to Lois. I was going to tell her bye again. Okay, since this is open, one thing we looked at, and we'll probably say, is that we'll likely comment on these points, which we believe would make the policy more consistent with state law about the system of care, family-driven practice, wraparound care coordination, and making a plan teams. So this is the way we will likely do our comments, is say like what we're referring to. And this is talking about the treatment plan, and that instead of the requirements about focusing on the parent or legal guardian's active participation, focusing on the treatment plan document and progress notes must contain evidence that the treatment team actively partners with families, etc. So going from a more family-driven perspective. And then there is language in there about special procedures, which are restrained seclusion. And this is one thing that I am very grateful to Medicaid, because they have been so open to talking through this past 2 or 3 days. And they were at some points just as confused by some of the language as I was. So the very good conversations, and I really appreciate them. Not because they meant this, but just because of the way a couple of sentences got structured. It could sound like special procedures, which are restraint seclusion, which are things that should hopefully be avoided completely, but should be very rare instances and should only be used in specific situations, just for that situation where there's dangerousness involved. It sounded like they could be incorporated into the treatment plan. Those are not treatments. And if they're in a treatment plan, they can be, used, overused, all kinds of things. So clarifying the language so that doesn't happen. And then also made a comment about referring families for wraparound and MAP teams as children are leaving facilities. And that's what these last 2 are about. And then public comments, they're due by March 18th. And then we included information about who they're addressed to and where you send them. There's no specific format is required for these. And this will be in our newsletter this week too, which normally comes out on Wednesdays, but because of the legislative deadlines, it's coming out tomorrow. We do encourage people to consider giving public comments. And one thing, again, you may not want to comment about a specific, you don't have to say 4.9.C.8. That may not be what you want to comment on. You can just give general feedback about how psychiatric residential treatment facilities can be as responsive as possible to children and families. But everyone from the public can share their comments when those opportunities are open. Okay. So that is what, and we are right up to the end. But that's our legislative and policy update. and we just do these periodically as things come out. So I wouldn't say for this month, or because we might do another one this month, or it might be a little longer than a month before we do one. But any thoughts or comments about any of that, or even this format, and how helpful is this? And is there anything we can do to get information out to you guys in a way that's most helpful to you? Any other thoughts? Is everybody's head spinning, or did it make sense?
It made sense to me.
You still processing, Karina?
Yes, ma'am. You know, I have hypothetical questions later, but yes, ma'am.
Karina's our processor in chief and has some of the best questions. Okay, well, thank you all for being here. Now, we did record this, and typically what we do is then we share it in a blog so people who weren't here can hear the same information. I did not say that at the beginning. So if anyone's on here and thinking, oh, no, you know, I said something, you know, and I don't think we had that much chat, but if you're thinking I would rather not this be out there, just contact me. And since I forgot to share that, and let me know. Okay. Thanks so much.